Great. Thank you, Don. We're so glad to be on here tonight. We're tickled and, thanks for asking. It's great to reconnect with some of my 4-H buds from days not so long ago. So we're thrilled to be able to do this. And as Don mentioned, I'm Rindy West, married to Justin, who will pop on the screen here in just a minute. But we are tickled tonight to just from show cattle in particular. And I personally kind of come from a ranching background and showed registered Herefords growing up. In fact, I started out with my first registered steer when I was in Walden, Colorado, and then we moved to the Sandhills in Nebraska, and I finished out my first 4-H year there. But I started with those good old red and white Herefords. So just to put that little pitch in right now, that if you're a first year 4-H member in the Beef Project, sometimes a Hereford's not a bad way to go. But anyway, grew up showing and then married Justin. We were in college together and both on the livestock judging team down at UW. And the rest is history, as they say. But I'll let Justin pop on here and he can tell you a little bit about himself. But we're tickled to be here.
Hey, everybody. I'm Justin. I work for Rindy.
Here, you're not on the screen from this little mark.
Hi. So anyway, yeah, Rindy pretty much outlined how we met. Ever since then, it has been all downhill, and that's been great. We appreciate being asked to join you guys tonight, talk about our experiences in show cattle. Want to preface that by saying that we weren't the first choice. I mean, I understand Don asked Donald Trump to be the first choice presenter tonight, but he had a presentation down in Houston that he was taking on. So then she actually asked somebody else smarter than us, and we were like 4th or 5th down the list. So you guys are really lucky. It'll be a lot of fun. Specifically, some things that we want to talk about is just some of our experiences with show cattle. Understand we wanted to have a little clinic on what we look for when we select steers or heifers and some of those things. This is designed to be interactive. We hope you have some questions that we can go from there, because I think you get more information and material out of that.
Screen here in just a minute.
Okay.
So when you're ready to start.
Yeah. So, I mean, we'll just kick the can loose. If you guys get questions, I'm sure there's something on this thing on Google or whatever we're on here that you guys can pop it up there on my face or whatever they call it and get us the questions. But we got a little handout. We'll kind of go through that. And basically, we call it Show Cattle Basics, at least from the perspective of the West Clan. And so here we go. Let's go show. I did this. That's picture Win. She's our youngest. She was shown at the Montana Junior Beef Expo there. Good picture. Really wild Hereford right there, as Rindy said. Very good one. Well, let's just get started. Some things, before you even pick an animal, you got to have a plan, you guys, and part of having a plan for your project, and it really doesn't matter if this project or this is anything in life, is you got to set some goals. You got to identify what you want to accomplish, where you're going to do things, when you're going to make that happen, and why you're really doing those things. And once you've kind of got those goals figured out, you want to outline strategies to be successful. And in a cattle project, I believe you have to have strategies for health, for nutrition, and then just for the preparation that it takes to get an animal from selection all the way through. Once you have all those things kind of outlined from a strategic standpoint, you kind of put it all together, put it in a plan, collaborate with others, and then you go ahead and implement that plan. And so I think we'll just kind of talk about all of those things. So if we're setting goals, the first thing we want to identify is what we are trying to accomplish. I know for our family that varies. That's why we have what seems to be the never-ending feed bill, because we have too many of them always on feed. We have Herefords for the Hereford Junior Nationals and for the state fair. We have crossbred livestock for even some that go into the fall. And so you just kind of identify what you want to go do and show, and know that each person has a different what that they're kind of identifying, and it's okay to have different things. You want to identify, am I interested in the steer project? Am I looking for heifers? And if I do show heifers, do I want to have them be a market heifer, which is, a viable path for a market animal, or am I looking for breeding animals? Once you've kind of pinned that down, research is the next most important thing. There are definitely critical factors. And since this is a collaborative thing of the state, some of the things that I really believe that need to be looked at as you're looking into your goals and researching some of the factors to help you get there, include facilities. They're going to go ahead and include equipment, and then also some special factors. And what I mean by those things is, when it comes to facilities, you have to have a good pen. You can't put market cattle in a little bitty pen and expect them to gain real efficiently and do it in a proper manner. And so, there are minimum square footage requirements for any class of livestock. But remember, cattle in particular are a large species, and they require more space. And if we want those animals to work efficiently, we need to have a decent sized pen for them. It needs to be free of debris and junk. Don't have old used tires in your pen. Be real nice if you didn't have a whole bunch of pallets laying around the ground there. I mean, make sure you have a really nice, good, clean environment. And I tell our kids that our pen needs to be just like their bedroom, and most of the time it looks like that, just full of everything that you can imagine on the ground everywhere. But the walls need to be kept in good shape. The door needs to be shut when you're in it. That pen to be set up free of obstacles, free of anything that can create problems. As you're identifying these goals and you look at your equipment, you got to have some good equipment. Unfortunately, cattle business is an expensive one, but you don't have to have fancy equipment. You need to have a good water tank. Probably finding some rusty old water heater, that the water never looks clean and fresh in is probably not good equipment. There's probably a better option for you out there. So make sure you got a good water tank. Make sure that you have a feed bunk to feed them in, safe, one that they can't get themselves down in. That's one of the things that concerns me most about most of the feed bunks, is that sometimes they get too low to the ground, and so these cattle can get tipped over inside of them, and that's bad because if they get on their back, they probably won't make it. So make sure you've got a good feed bunk as far as those things do. Same with your hay bunk. If you feed large round bales and you have them on a self feeder, that's certainly fine. Just make sure you have something that they're not going to get themselves stuck in or whatever, because you don't want to have those things happen to them.
Volume is turned off.
When you're looking at things, make sure you look at all those things equipment-wise. The other thing you got to research is certainly special factors given your area. And, that's a variety of different things. But one thing that comes to mind in Wyoming in particular is we're pretty fortunate up here in Sheridan. We're like one of the lowest elevations in the entire state. But those of you guys that live in the, high desert mountain plains, Laramie, down in the southwest corner of the state, you got to worry about brisket. And so you need to find cattle that, potentially have the right bloodlines and genetics so that they don't have those kinds of issues. If you show Charolais type cattle, you got to make sure you have shelter for them, because you don't stuff like that. So there's definitely some special factors that you need to consider as you're selecting your animals, and those are going to be very specific to your location and to the types of animals you certainly pick. You need to set a financial goal on this, and honestly, it's not cheap to do these things, particularly if you ever have to buy your feed out of a bag, which a lot of us do. That's not the way you have to do it, but I tell our family to always plan on a couple ton of grain and a couple ton of hay per steer project that we have a year at a minimum that they'll consume, sometimes more. You need to make sure that you compensate for things like hoof care and veterinary costs, and you look at all that as it relates to what your endpoint's going to be, which is the win that we're going to talk about shortly. So, there's definitely a financial thing. You need to set some goals where your budget is and know where that's going to take you, because that's going to help you pick the animal. Last thing we talk about in goals is just functional goals. And really by functional goals, what I'm talking about is, if your goal is to be a highly competitive show person, you may have a different set of goals than somebody that wants to raise an efficient project, one that is designed to be more practical in scope. Both are super good options. Both are super fine. They're just a different path. And so when we talk about the what, you need to talk about what functionally you're trying to accomplish with your goal. you know, as far as goals go, we also need to talk about where. And what I really mean by that is you need to know where your endpoint is. In our particular setup, we have a few steers that end at the county fair. We have a few steers that end at fall shows, whether that's the Nile or Denver in January or somewhere. And so we have to, you know, accommodate the where your endpoint is and organize that as it relates to the goals of your project. You need to know where your transitions are going to come through that project. And if you're transitioning, say, from a breeding heifer to, you know, a pasture cow, or if that heifer is going to continue a show career as a cow-calf pair down the road, you need to kind of be forethinking some of those things so that you're not caught behind when it gets to those things. So know when your project's going to complete if it's a market animal, and know where you're going to transition if you're dealing with a breeding set of livestock. Also, you know, I mean, are you just doing county fair? Are you going to do state fair? Are you going to go to some jackpot shows? You're going to take your extras on? Those are all important factors that we consider when we select animals, because, you know, animals that are going to be done, say, at your county level, some of those fairs end in July. You're going to want them to be earlier maturing. You know, if they're a state animal or even some in the fall, you're going to want something that's going to be a little later maturing. And so it's really important to identify where as we're looking at some of these things as well. When is important. We're starting now. You need a calendar. I noticed Dawn had one right behind her in her office there, Showtime's calendar. We have a calendar in the feed room, and then carry a calendar in the house as well. You have to identify key targets and dates, like the first time you want to take them out and the last time you want to take them out, just so that you kind of know where you're at. It's also important as we talk about nutrition, which we will do later, and then how the animal is developing. You want to put on that calendar key dates, like if you have a breeding heifer, when you want to go ahead and prepare that heifer for either synchronization or pasture breeding rotation or whatever it might be. And then the other thing that's very important at our house that we make sure we always do is our calendar helps us remind when we need to provide worming, hoof care, treatments of any kind that are part of their animal health plan. What I'm really talking about there, if you're talking market steers, we like to weigh ours monthly as they're developing up until about May, and then every couple of weeks. And we like to try to do that as close to the same day and the same time of day as possible, so that we can establish some consistency and see if our program is working. And that leads kind of the final thing there. If you record all that, it gives you all the information that you're going to need to try to be a little more successful with the project, whether you need to make adjustments, whatever that might be. You know, as goals go, you need to know why you're doing it. Every family has different sets of goals, and whatever your priorities are as families are certainly fine. For us, it's to be together with our friends in the state and the regional shows that we go to better ourselves and just enjoy the livestock industry. So we set some stretch goals. Man, we'd really like to make the sale sometime at the National Western Stock Show. Probably not going to happen, but you know what? We're going to try real hard to make that a priority for us. You know, and the why deals with why we're doing the project, and that's hopefully so that you know, we get to know more people and just really enjoy being part of the ag industry. So that's kind of what we do. But you need to know why you're doing it, because that'll create the roadmap to get to the success principles that you need so that you can follow through and certainly be successful with those things. Once you've kind of done your goals, you got to implement strategies to make things happen and succeed. You know, one of the most important strategies for success in this deal is health of your animal. That herd health or that livestock animal health is very important. I'm going to tell you that if you're not looking at your animals when you're feeding them each morning, and you're not noticing if they don't want to get up, you're not doing your job. And so when my family feeds in the morning, one of the most important things they do is they test to see how quickly the animal eats, to see if they've got a good appetite. And then they look for if there's any abnormalities, watery eyes, you know, a snotty nose perhaps, maybe their head down or their ears down or their tails flat or their backs popped up. because herd health is one of the quickest things that can derail a project's success and slow everything down. Strategies for success include some technology, basic technology. If you guys have a project with beef cattle and you do not own a thermometer and a simple vet supply kit, and really what I'm talking about there is go to Walmart and get a digital thermometer, put that in a simple vet supply kit that has things like syringes, needles, maybe a basic antibiotic like some kind of oxy tetracycline or something like that, and an anti-inflammatory like Banamine in case you start getting some sickness. You're not in a position to be prepared to deal with potential problems that come up. Because cattle stress, things change. The only real way to know if we've got an issue with an animal is to kind of test its body temperature, and so that's why that thermometer is super important. We put veterinary in our strategies for succeeding. It's super important to develop a program with your vet, and then it's more important to have your vet's telephone number in your cell phone. And I'm certain that they don't want you to call them all the time with problems or concerns, or certain simple things. But if you start suspecting your animal is struggling, your veterinarian is probably the smartest thing you can do quickly. If you've got a fever and you're not feeling well, a lot of times you go to the doctor. Well, it's no different for your cattle. So make sure you have up a little bit of a herd health plan. Things that are really important to talk with your vet about is different parts of the state require different types and schedules for worming. Same thing with your breeding, and then other general health type things are important there. But make sure you identify kind of a veterinary plan and kind of follow through with that. Nutrition is something that's super important to be. That's kind of where I left off. Nutrition is probably one of the most important things that we have to do in our beef project. And it's something you need to think about early and often. And those of you who've done it before can probably understand and relate to this. But it's absolutely imperative that you feed a complete feed. It does not have to come from a bag. It can come from the grain bin, but you need to have someone help you design a ration that meets all the nutritional requirements of the animals. And so one of the things I tell everybody that's absolutely, I believe, an important factor for growing market steers, breeding heifers, or market heifers is to pick a complete feed ration that's 12 to 14% in protein, has a baseline somewhere between 13 and 15% fiber, and somewhere around 3% in fat. You can always make adjustments if your steer's not coming along as fast and needs more energy. You can add some corn, and corn will create a higher energy feed, and it'll pump the fat levels up. You can increase the fiber with beet pulp if you got one that's too fat. There's a lot of different things, but baseline ration really needs to be tucked around that fiber, 3% fat. And we talked, the feed can come from a bag. It can be homegrown. It depends on your situation, and either choice is a good, acceptable one. You just need to do what works best in your program. That said, what is super important in my book is a vitamin and mineral program. We are big believers in Multimin 90. It's an injectable trace mineral. We give that early on, and then we'll give them a booster in about 6 months. So about weaning time, they get one, and then about 6 months, we give them more. We keep our cattle on a constant lick tub, a stress tub at all times, and then make sure that they're on a good mineral pack, whether that's in their lick tubs or even just a direct loose mineral. And that's super important. Always have to have abundance, fresh, clean water, or else your program will fail immediately or even before it started. And then as far as nutrition goes, make sure you develop a great relationship with the feed store or your nutritionist. They're going to help you look for different things. They'll help you analyze, if your feed's doing what it needs to do and those types of things. I talked here about amounts. We figure 2 to 2.5 tons of feed per steer we feed out, about that much in hay. It's kind of a baseline to look at. It's pretty easy on bag feed to get to, $1,500 to $2,000 of cost in them suckers pretty quick. And it may seem like a lot. That's why that financial goal we talked about earlier is something you have to identify. Label directors are important, and that's why the nutritionist or your feed store person is super important. You know, you want to make sure you check on that label to make sure if there's ionophores, Moninsons, you know, anything like that, that, you know, in a cross-contamination scenario that horses got into it, and those types of things. And I didn't put this on here, but one thing that we do is we make our steers clean up. And so, you know, if they don't clean their feed up, then that's a symbol that they either are getting too much feed or the type of feed they're getting isn't working and they're not properly using it. And so you need to adjust your rations that way. One of the last things we talked about in their strategies was preparation. You know, preparation varies from person to person. The first thing we talk about is daily care. You know, you have to look at your goals. If your goal is to, you know, go to lots of shows and have lots of hair on your animals, you know, then you're going to work on your rinsing program, and you'll do that 2 or 3 times a day. You know, if your goal is to raise a practical, functional 4-H market steer, one that's, you know, going to do just fine, but doesn't have you know, that extra labor involved, that's fine too. You know. So you just kind of have to know your own situation, identify what's important to you guys, and go from there. And again, it talks about your endpoint. Know where your endpoint is, and then make sure that you're practicing with your animals so that you can avoid as much stress as possible with them as they go through different things. There's monthly care, I think, as part of preparation. It's important. One of those things is we watch very closely the way our feet look. And folks, if you don't know a hoof trimmer that's close to your area, do some research and find one, or ask your educators to try to track one down that might be able to make a loop through. Having those cattle standing flat and appropriately on their feet is very important to their development. And I think it's something that's very important. And so we pay a lot of attention to feet. In fact, we look at them monthly. We may not inordinary type growth patterns with their hooves, their hoof walls, their toes, etc. We do treat for lice on a monthly basis, particularly during lice season. We do use a rotating treatment program from permethrin sprays to silence to clean up different types of protocols there through that lice period. It's one of the biggest impacts to daily gain in cattle and just their overall way they feel. And then finally, on a monthly basis, we kind of analyze how things look as far as whether we think they need wormed or whatever, and we kind of follow the advice of our vet on that particular deal. There are preparation responsibilities that can be for the entire duration of the project. Again, that's situational. You know, if you're like my kids that are crazy about it, you know, they rinse and put their cattle behind fans of the 270 days left before county fair. They'll probably be in behind that, at least 200 of them. That's not everybody. That doesn't mean we're doing it right. It's just how we do it. So you just have to analyze and kind of look at your situation. And once you've done all those strategies, you develop your plan. You collaborate with your vet, with your feed guy, with your neighbors, with your 4-H, your FFA educators. You ask questions, then you ask a few more, you share some thoughts, and then you share some ideas, and you try. There's absolutely no magic with this. It just takes a lot of hard work, it takes a lot of effort, and it's a lot trial by error. And what may work one year may not work the next, and so you just have to be diligent in trying to execute a plan to the best that you can. And on that kind of, and it's go time. Monitor how things are working, and go ahead and you know, if you need to make adjustments, you make adjustments. So why we're really here tonight, though, and I apologize, I did want to go through that because I think all those are important pieces that need to be done prior to selecting the show animal. But we're here to kind of talk about how, you know, what we think are important criteria as we select show animals. And I really have about 5 tips for you, different things to talk about here. They are choosing a breed or type of show animal, making sure you're looking them over for the selection traits that are important to a successful outcome, finding balance in what you're looking for as far as that animals. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Making sure you have a really strong genetic base, and then know what you play as far as the role is as it continues through your 4-H and FFA project. So I wanted to start out with choosing a breed. And a breed can be anything from as direct as, you know, a straight Angus, straight Hereford, could be Shorthorns, Simmentals, could be crossbred cattle. I mean, that's not a specific breed, but you got to know where you kind of want to go. You know, we show a lot of Herefords. We show them because they are just good cattle. They're easy to be around to the point they're almost aggravating, but we like them. And so for us, that's an important breed for us. We, on the other hand, are not big Angus people. Don't know why. It's not because they're bad cattle, just because we aren't into it. That doesn't mean that may be something that isn't very beneficial to you or your family. And you know, and like I said, we like the crossbred steers just because they seem to kind of be the thing. Family, what you really want to show. Because if you're not showing something that you want to show, you won't do the right things as far as the follow through with it. It's just human nature. And that doesn't mean that anybody does anything necessarily wrong. It's just kind of how it goes. So pick a breed or pick a project that you want to show. I think that's the single most important thing with that. And then once you've done that, you have to inspect what you expect. And what I mean by that is when you select these animals, you got to look at them. I know it's super easy to look at the internet. I know it's super easy to call a guy up and send me a video or send me a picture. But I don't know. I put a little picture on this slide here. And if you look at that animal, he looks pretty good. But we brought that one to our house. And that was not a very good animal. And he looked great. And the guy was a nice guy. And I don't feel like he did anything wrong. I feel like we did. We didn't look at the animal. And so as easy it is to buy online, I would highly recommend that you deal with somebody super reputable and that you do every effort that you can to look at. And that being said, the absolute most important thing when we're picking a 400 to 500 pound calf is making sure that they start with a good base. When you build a house, you got to have a good, strong foundation or else that sucker's going to fall over. And it's no different with show cattle, show pigs, show lambs, show goats, whatever you guys may have. Structural correctness is an absolute key piece. When we're looking for structural correctness, we pay really close attention, particularly with the crossbred cattle, to their shoulders and their hocks. As cattle have evolved, especially with club calves in particular, in order to jam their tops into more shape, more muscle in their hips, and get them cattle wider, they've done that at the sacrifice of the natural shape of muscle. I'm not sure if anyone out here would, I mean, or if anyone disagrees with me, please let me know. But muscle's round. It's not square. It's really not flat. But yet we've determined that that's an important factor as we're creating club cattle. And so the West family looks for structural correctness. Their toes need to point north. Their heels need to point south. We want the angle of their shoulder to be as close to a 45-degree angle as possible. And we actually like to see just a little bit of round shape out of their hip because we believe that that pushes their hocks further back and their leg into more of a natural, more of a banana type shape. We don't need them straight-legged. Straight-legged cattle are just kind of a bad thing as far as structure goes. And so we look for those things. We want good shape and angle to their shoulder. We want to have, you know, a little bit of round shape out of their hip. And we really are looking for a hock that's not too erect or straight because that pushes them up on their pasterns as well. When they move, they need to fill their tracks as close as possible because what's going to happen with these cattle is they get bigger and stouter and heavier muscle. And it doesn't matter if it's a Hereford or an Angus or a Simmental or a club calf. They're going to become more powerful typically as you give them more feed. As they become more powerful, their ability to fill their tracks on the stride gets more difficult. And so they better start with it as a calf or they'll never have it as a mature animal. And so we want them to be as sound as physically possible. At the same time, point number 2, we like big butts. And muscle's super important because after all, when we market these animals to somebody it's those primal cuts that are really important, which come out of their top. You know, their sirloin, their round, you know, the expensive cuts are the most important things, and you need to have muscle shape to be competitive. It's interesting, however, though, as the cattle industry's evolved, there can be too much muscle. We don't want cattle to look like a bodybuilder. We want them to be smooth, wide, and powerful, more like a lineman on a football team than the guy that goes to the bodybuilding contest. So you want them to have big butts and big tops and be powerful in terms of their muscle shape, but you don't want them to be so bound up and expressive that they lose all of the natural doability and just productivity that cattle have been bred to have. The West family thinks it's pretty important that we have really soft middle, deep flanked, and big chested cattle. And when I'm talking about big chested cattle, I'm talking about their width of chest. And chest floor is important in cattle because everything they need in order to convert their feed stems from their ability to breathe. Those lungs have to work. You can't have that if you got a little low, narrow chest. You can't get more muscle on that frame and skeleton with that feed if you have no chest floor. And so we like them to have a big sweeping belly. We like that front flank and that rear flank to be as soft and level as you can get it. And we really like to see a lot of rib shape in those cattle. In fact, I'll take one with more rib shape than I will with muscularity out of the gate because I believe we can feed that in them if their genetics are there. And so, yeah, that soft middle, good flank deal is super important. We want that extra capacity to create that extra efficiency in those cattle. One of the things that's important nowadays, maybe more so than ever, is that you need cattle to have some length, and they need to have, you know, enough design to get extra growth. The purebred cattle, for the most part, kind of have done a pretty good job of, as they've made them stouter and wider, pushed all that extra muscle into them, they've taken away their natural growth. They're smaller. They don't have that there. And now we're getting what I would argue are cattle that have become non-practical. And so we like to see them that have a little bit of length to them. It's not the easiest to feed one that's a little longer, but boy, you'll get a lot of pounds and you get a lot of extra weight out of them. And you actually are creating, you know, a better overall product, which I believe is the most important thing that we need to do, you know. Unfortunately, these club cap guys have really pushed that to smaller scaled, more jammed up and compact cattle. And I don't think that's necessarily the right direction. At least we don't feel it is. So when we select, we try to find them with a little more growth to them. You know, we're picking show cattle. And I mean, whether you're doing it on a practical front or you're going to put them in a cooler and have tons of hair on them, they need to look like a show animal. What I mean by that is their neck needs to start at the top of their shoulder and it needs to roll up into a nice clean pole. And they need to have an adequate length and trimness to that front end. Big old sloppy front ends are good feeding kind of cattle, but boy, they sure don't look good when you stand next to them in a back picture drop. And so try to find some balance in there and find a decent enough front end in the calf. You want them to have that. You want them to be level lined. You want them to have good feet and legs, and you want them to kind of be boxy in nature in their overall look. They need to look like they could stand in front of a backdrop and take a good picture. And the last thing that when we select animals, it's really important to us, you guys, is disposition. And I say this for a couple of reasons. First reason is that we have a 6-year-old that runs around our house. And so we have absolutely zero patience for any animal that might create extra harm for her. At the same time, that isn't working for me either. So I don't like them if they're have a poor disposition. And maybe the most important reason disposition is important in these cattle when we select is because cattle with a better disposition are less likely to stress and they are more feed efficient. And so it's very important that you look to disposition as well. You can find the nicest one in the whole wide world, but if you're the only one that can be around him, it doesn't make a very fun project. It makes a really long year. And so really look for some disposition. Next tip that we tell people to look for is balance. balanced analysis. Sounds like a good idea, right? When we were in livestock judging, our livestock judging coach used to harp on us to avoid single trait selection. And what he meant by that always was, don't go pick the biggest hip one out there just because it's the biggest hip, especially if it's the tightest ribbed, or it's got the worst front end, or its feet point east and west rather than north and south. Really look for one that puts a lot of things together, even if you sacrifice maybe some muscle or a more complete structurally correct one. And I can't emphasize this enough. Quality with a good judge will always beat a single trait. And I believe that we are doing a better job now with our judge training and in our livestock judging programs for the most part, that you're going to see a bigger emphasis on quality. And so as you're selecting, pick quality. Big-footed, big bone, stout enough, high volumed cattle that have some balance and some eye appeal. It's okay to sacrifice some muscle for better quality. It really is. Be the first place to get done. So a good tip when you're selecting them is just use a balanced analysis as you're doing things. Find ones that you know will feed good, stay sound, and are stout enough. Those ones will be at the backdrop at the end, I promise you. One of the other tips that I would tell you tonight is to make sure, genetically speaking, hey, make sure they got some pretty good genes, right? It's maybe the biggest and most critical component to high quality show animals. I mean, man, they got this Facebook and iFace and I don't know what they all got, but they got all these things and snap to instant or whatever they call that thing. You can find out more information about the bloodlines, the sires, and the dams of this by just becoming Matt Lautner's friend on Facebook than ever before when I was growing up. So the access to information's there. Research those bloodlines. Look at the sires. If that sucker looks like that he's about 2.5 foot tall as a mature animal, I don't know if you want to buy that steer. Also go out there and see if any of the calves out of that bull are winning anything. I mean, I know marketing plays a big piece of that, but the reality is good ones are good ones. American Royal Livestock Show, steer show was Saturday, and the champion reserve champion steer were out of a bull called Here I Am. Now, you can go out there and Google Here I Am, and you're going to see all kinds of winners out of Here I Am. So if you find a pretty good Here I Am calf that's in your price range, that looks pretty good, there's a decent chance he comes loaded with some pretty good genetics. And I'm not saying you should go buy Here I Am. I'm just using that as an example. There's all kinds of access to information out there. You're a lot better off to use something that's proven and known and has a track record because the genetics are there. Your other talking about a club calf deal. Say you're going to the neighbor's Angus herd and you're pulling an Angus heifer out of there. That guy knows which ones are the best Angus genetics that he's got in his herd. Absolutely know that. And that resource is something that you need to tap and get in there. Because the reality is that most people want to send you one that's going to do well because they don't want the reputation of sending something that's not high quality. So talk to your breeders, research the bloodlines and sires and dams. It's okay to go to these chat rooms, Steer Planet, whatever it is. Ask the question. You get lots of information and just take it with a grain of salt and kind of see what's working out there. But do get good genes. It makes a great big difference. The last tip is know that honestly the real work starts when you get your calf home. I mean, you can spend a lot of time looking at calves, and once you pick one, you'll be all excited and you'll get that sucker home. You'll be like, wow, why did I pick this piece of junk? The reality is that there was a reason you picked him early on, and the hard work really starts then. Your actions do as much as anything to determine success. You've got to work hard. You've got to feed those cattle on a schedule. You got to weigh them. You got to adjust so that you can see what's going on with them. And it doesn't matter if you're taking them to the Denver Stock Show or you're taking them to the Wyoming Winter Fair. It doesn't matter. The more you put into it, the more you'll get out. And so, in most cases, I tell my son all the time that sometimes less is more, because if any of you know Brady, he likes to visit. And so we're always telling him to kind of tighten that up. But in this case, as it relates to working with your calf, more is more and less is not more. You need to spend the time and develop and foster great relationships with experts. You guys are so lucky out here because in Wyoming in particular, we got so many great people. I mean, you got Dawn, down in your neck of the woods, and Mary Louise. I mean, she's awesome. You got Mr. Birch and Casper, and I'm talking about Brock my age, and then you got his dad who's an expert. And you've got Quinn LaFollette and Powell. And, I mean, there's a limitless group of experts that can help us. You need to develop those relationships and ask those guys questions because, these people want to see you be successful. Your veterinarian is an underutilized asset. They know health of an animal and the anatomy and the physiology of how that animal works better than you or I do. You need to develop a relationship with them. Your feed rep should be one of the guys that you talk to every time you go get feed. Hey, man, I've just noticed the steer's just not doing as good. It looks like they're a little thinner. He'll be like, "Wow, man, somebody came in the other day and told me the same thing." So we put them on this, this high fat additive, and boy, he said in 2 weeks that steer just changed a bunch. Well, that's pretty valuable information, and it's been tested, and so that's good to know. Know somebody that lives and breathes and loves this stuff. A fitter, I call them. You don't need somebody to help you trim them and do all that. I mean, you can figure that out. Kirk Stierwald's got the best DVDs on the planet. With Google and YouTube and all that good stuff, you can get that too. But you need to have somebody that knows, tricks and traits. And man, I got a steer that's bloating. What can I do? Wow, we've got to figure out how to get that down. Maybe there's some things out there. So know a fitter, and cherish the relationship you can build with your educators. They're fine people. They work really hard after hours all the time, setting up stuff for you. They will go to bat for you, especially if you show that interest. And educational events, jackpot shows that you can afford to go to. Those are all great life experiences. They'll make your project better, I promise you. Learn from your competitors. Do not be afraid to ask them how they do it. The good ones will tell you. You still have to beat them anyway. And, it's okay to ask. And then I kind of finished up this slide with just kind of a motto at our house. Is you want to dig the well before you're thirsty. And what I mean by that is if you wait till the last minute to try to go in and be successful, you've waited too long. You're going to be thirsty. So please start now and do those things. It's been a pleasure tonight. We'll open up to any conversation or questions you may have. I know we're taking a little bit longer because of technology and stuff, but great big thank you from all of us up here in Sheridan.
Perfect. Thanks, Justin. Does anybody have any questions for Justin or Rindy? So Justin, I do just have a question, just because it was something that was asked earlier, Rindy or whoever, which one of you guys maybe want to answer. If a kid has county fair at about like the beginning of August, which is typically where they are, like what size of calf should they be looking at like right now? What is that a good point starting weight for them now? And I know that's a loaded question because it's going to depend on feed and environment and all that, but if a kid's just going out to a ranch and wants to buy a calf, like how much should that weigh?
So here's the reality of that is that you have from today till about the 1st of August, you got 278 days. And, I don't have my calculator right here in front of me, but, a steer's probably going to gain somewhere between 2 and 3 pounds average through that entire time. And so if you figured 2 and if we knew that our steers need to be, in my opinion, somewhere between 1250 and 1350 on the end, I would take 2.5 times 278 days and subtract that from 1,300 pounds, and that'll tell you about where you should try to pick by your calf.
Perfect.
Yeah, and that varies. Randy brought up a point here. Hip heights are something we don't talk about as much as we used to. Back when I showed cattle, 56, 57 inch steers were kind of the norm. You know, now we had one of the bigger ones that we've shown in a while, and he was 51.5, Braden just told me. And so, you know, the bigger the hip height, the more weight you're going to need to get that calf to a market spot that you want them to be. And so, you know, you kind of got to look at your animal and make adjustments based on that. Smaller frame cattle, you know, if they're going to be smaller, you know, you could get by with a smaller steer because he may be done at 1,200 pounds. You know, again, it's just all your endpoint where you want to be there. But a good rule of thumb, you know, right now, if you took 2.5 pounds times 280 days, about took that off 1,300 pounds, that's a good place to start.
Perfect. I think that's a good question. I think I'll just add to what Justin said is I think sometimes the producer that you're getting your calf from can maybe help you. If you guys are new to the beef project and you're trying to figure out what that target weight is, whether it's at 1,300 pounds is, I think, as Justin said back on the point number 5 is to ask those questions. And I think that's a great question that you can work with the producer that you're getting those calves from as far as where they think that calf can finish out. So I don't know, just to add to Justin, I think that's a good point, but I know that was one question that was asked. Anybody else have questions or thoughts? Anything for Justin, Rindy? All right. Well, I just have a couple announcements I guess I want to share with you guys is that I am super thankful for Justin and Rindy, and honestly, technology is a challenge, and so thanks to each of you guys for staying on and working through us with us. I still think that Zoom, even with our challenges, is a great way to be able to connect to people like Justin and Rindy who live in a different part of the state, and we can get their knowledge. And so thanks for sticking with that.
Appreciate you guys, and just